So in this video, I want to use our data set in the last tab called pivot table to demonstrating how can you use Excel to creating the pivot table. And here in this data set, we totally have 4 columns and observation, square feet, type, and the subdivision. But actually, we only have 3 variables. The first column A is just our element name, but the variable including the square feet, type, the house type, and the subdivision. So I will creating 2 cross tabulations. One is for both variable or category data. So the other one is category data, the other one is quantitative. Okay, so in order to creating this pivot table, as the name I call it pivot table, we just need to creating the pivot table. So similar, I've been emphasized this 3 times because during this chapter we use the pivot table 3 times. The first time we use it is to creating the frequency distribution and creating histogram. The second time we use a pivot table is creating frequency distribution for category data so that we can creating bar and the pie chart. Now we are actually going to using the pivot table in this scenario that we can find the relationship between 2 variables. So in order to creating the pivot table, since we're going to including more variables, what I'm going to do is I'm going to selecting all my rows from A to D. Okay. So select from A to D. So when you do this kind of selection, you want to make sure there is no column is blank. So what does that mean? So if A, B, and if a C column is blank, there's nothing, and then your data show up in D and E. So you want to make sure you delete your blank column. Otherwise, Excel will give you an error. Okay. So make sure all your variables are next to each other when you are selecting for your pivot table. Okay. I select from A and to D column, and I go to Insert, and I'm going to click Pivot Table. Again, I'm going to place it in the new worksheet, and then click OK. Okay, now you should not feel strange about this because we've been seeing this 3 times now. And so in our first exercise, I want to find the relationship between the type and the subdivision. And we want to look at how many houses are, let's say, how many houses are ranch and in the Hidden Hill, and how many houses are colonial but located at Westwood, etc. Okay, so to do that, I need to creating cross tabulation. So first, since it's a relationship between the type and the subdivision, on this section, you are able to see all 4 columns name. That makes sense because we select all 4 columns. Now I'm going to put using the type to label each rows and using the subdivision to label each columns. So what I'm going to do is I click the type and hold it and drag it down to rows. And now I'm going to go into click the subdivision, click it, hold it, and drag to columns. Okay, so now you will be able to immediately see, hey, I already creating this table now. So each rows are used to label different type of house, colonial, ranch, or split level. And each column are used to label each subdivision, Hidden Hill, Oak Knoll, Westwood. Now what I'm missing is the frequency in this table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the type again and drag it down to value. Okay, now you can see all the number inside the table were filled. So those are the frequencies. Okay, those are the frequencies. Some students say, hey, Dr. J, why you only drag the type to the values? Should I also drag the subdivision? So the answer is no. So when you're creating the cross tabulation, you only need to drag one of your variable into the values. So if you drag the second one to your values, you actually make a big mistakes. You should only drag one of the variable into the value, either type or subdivision. You cannot drag in both into the value section. Okay. Now this is the table called cross tabulation. From the cross tabulation, it allows you to find the relationship between these 2 variables, right? So for instance, from this table, you will see we have 3 houses are colonial located at Hidden Hill, and we have 4 houses, they are colonial located at Oak Knoll. And we have 3 houses are colonial located at Westwood. So it's literally help you to understand the relationship between the home style and also the subdivisions. Okay, so this is when we have both variable are categorical, how you create cross tabulation. Okay, it's very easy. Now let's move on to the next. How about we want to create a cross tabulation to understand the relationship between the square feet and the type. So the way we are doing it are very similar as what we did at the beginning. So we're going to select all my data. Remember, always remember including the label. Okay, once you're including the label, and then you go into insert and then click pivot table. Okay, after you click the pivot table, and you can click OK. Now what you're gonna do is you will come here to drag the square feet. I'm gonna use square feet to label my rows, and I'm gonna drag the type to label my columns. Okay, and then the next thing is I'm missing inside, right? You can drag either square feet or type. So I'm gonna drag my square feet into the value. Again, you only drag one of them. So before, there is a two thing you need to do adjustment for this cross tabulation. Okay, so the first is, as you notice that we only have 25 houses, but as you look at inside numbers, so they are not 25 houses. So if you look at the value section here, you notice that instead of counting, you are summing the value. So therefore, the number here is not counting how many houses belong to those category. You are actually summing their square footage together. So what you need to do is choose one of the value inside your table, and then right-click the mouse, called a summarize value by, because currently it's sum, you're going to change into count. Okay, so some students say, hey, why Dr. J, I didn't do that for this table, but now I need to do that for this table. So the reason is because when you drag the variable to the value section, if you do that variable is a quantitative data, like here is square footage. By default, they're going to use a sum. However, when you drag the value here is the type, and then since the type is a category data, you no longer need to do that adjustment. So I intentionally picked the square footage here so that you will be aware that sometimes you do need to adjust the value here from sum to count. So how do you know whether it's a sum or count? Double check the right down corner here. So the right down corner here should always equal to your sample size. So if the value down here is not your sample size, and you need to double check whether the number is a counting or is a sum or other method. Okay, so this is one adjustment I need to make. And the second, since the square footage here is a categorical data, quantitative data, so they treat each unique value as a class. So that's what we got here. So based on this table, you won't get any insight because each unique square footage, you only have one house. So you won't get any insight. So the best way to do is trying to group in your quantitative data. So that is one thing you always need to do. So for the cross tabulation, if one of the variable is a quantitative data, you need to remember to grouping them. So it depends on if it's a homework assignment, they usually show you how the class is going to look like. But if it's not homework assignment, if you have the freedom to create your cross tabulation, then you need to use your business judgment to say, hey, how I want to grouping my classes. Okay, so let's grouping my classes. Choose one of the label here and then right click the mouse and group. Since here I really don't have any reference on the groups, but I do want to make sure I don't have a lot of classes. And if you think about the houses, so maybe every 1,000 square feet increase, I would consider one category. So therefore, I don't want to change my start and ending value. That is the smallest and largest value I can have. But I do want to change my class width to 1,000 so that I want to make sure every group, they will have at least 1,000 square footage increase, right? So I click OK. Okay, now instead of many classes, I am able to grouping my square footage into two groups. One group is less than 2,949 square feet. The other group is larger than and equal to 2,950 square feet. So this allows me to separate my house between small house to the larger houses, right? So now you are able to see that among my small houses, most of them are colonial, right? We have 6 of them. So among my large houses, and we do have a relatively more split level, are larger houses. Okay, so this is gonna give us different insight. Okay, key takeaway here. Okay, so it is easy to create cross tabulation if both are category data. So if at least one of them are quantitative data, you need to do 2 adjustments. First, make sure your value. So the value section here, right? The value section here is a count. Double check that. And the second adjustment you need to make is for your quantitative data, like here with square feet, you always need to group them properly in order to get a business insight. Okay, so if you don't group them, you won't get a good cross tabulation to allow you find the insight. So make sure never forget about grouping your quantitative data when you're creating the pivot table. Okay, so that is the end of the cross tabulation.